Good morning, everybody. It's Steve Brown from Mirae Securities, Mirae Live, Head of Institutional Sales. Joining us this morning, we have Mr. Eddie Tai, who's the General Partner and Co-Founder of one of the leading venture capital companies active in Vietnam, Ascend Vietnam Ventures. Eddie, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here.
Thank you. You have quite a checkered, illustrious academic record, Yale, Harvard, and also giving back to the community. You're on the UNICEF Advisory Board in Vietnam as well since 2021, helping with the advancement of child health and education activities in Vietnam. The venture capital part of your business model, though, I think with yourself and Bin Tran is of probably the most outstanding part of what you're doing, because you can give back to a whole pile of young entrepreneurial startup, hopeful business leaders of the future, based on your academic qualifications, based on your civic duties and outlook as well. So you bring a lot to the table for young entrepreneurs.
That's the hope.
Yeah, well, it's rare, which is why thank you for joining us today. Because there are competitive players out there, but many of them have a very strict, dry business outlook, and you bring a holistic approach to what you're doing with Ascend Vietnam Ventures. So tell us about your time immediately prior to Vietnam, then what brought you to Vietnam firstly?
Sure, thanks. So I'm Vietnamese American. I was born and raised on the East Coast US, and spent most of my education and early work experience over there, and working generally with large established American companies. And doing that, you can learn a lot and work with big dollar projects. But the ultimate impact of what a young professional can do, it can be distant, hard to feel and see. While I was doing that, I would recall my visits to Vietnam. As a Vietnamese American, I've been visiting here since 21 years ago. My first visit was as a teenager, visiting family and exploring from north to south. I kept thinking about how if I were working here, I could be helping people create new businesses or even new industries. That seemed more exciting. So I spent a little bit of time exploring that possibility, traveling here on a number of occasions, and ultimately in 2012 decided to move here full time.
Yeah, and you were one of the first leaders of the VC scene in Vietnam at that time. Yourself and your fellow partners launched 500 startups soon after, successful VC vehicle. Some of the investments there, some of the quite well-known companies of today in Vietnam, we use base.vn ourselves, for example. Yeah. Now, how did it come together to establish the VC business for you?
It took quite a bit of time, to be honest. So, moving over here 2012, there were still a limited number of smartphone users. E-commerce was very, very nascent, sub $100 million a year of GMV. So actually, when I was first working here, I thought it might take 10 years for the ecosystem to be ready. So I actually worked with another Korean company called CJ over a couple of years. But during that time, I moonlighted evenings and weekends, meeting entrepreneurs at events or one-on-one, and ultimately helping a few. And what I discovered over that time was that there was a lot more going on than I expected. And there were great individuals, very ambitious, very agile. And when I spent a little time with them, they could do a lot with that time. So in 2014, I decided to quit corporate and try to raise a fund. I thought it was the right time. I spoke with some investors. They gave me verbal commits, but as you know, the money's not in until it's in the bank. And turns out it was probably too early. I was 29 years old, a solo GP, never invested in venture before. So perhaps I should have known it would be harder than I expected, but it was. Even I spoke with Ben Tran, my now partner. I spoke with him and asked him to invest in my effort at the time, and he politely listened to my pitch for 30 minutes and then politely declined after that. So, I went back to the drawing board towards the end of 2014 and thought, okay, is the market too early? Am I too early? And I told myself, yeah, probably. But if I'm too early, it's only by a couple of years. And I'd much rather be early than late. So went back to the drawing board and ultimately convinced Ben, after visiting him in San Francisco several times, to not simply put some money to an effort, but actually work with me to build a fund. And same theory with 500 startups, same journey, with 500 startups. And by late 2015, we were working all together, us, me, Ben, and 500 startups. It still took another 3 years almost to have our final close of our first fund, which was only $14 million. But while that's a small amount in the world, it was a big deal here in Vietnam, and we were able to back some really great folks.
Sure. And since then, you've gone on together to do Ascend Vietnam Ventures. And you were talking, you raised $14 million, but with AVV, you've just closed $64 million US, and you're only after 50. So people are watching you, people are appreciating you, your values and social ethics, business knowledge as well. And with the mix that you've got there, the check sizes can be bigger. I've read that you've been contemplating being able to disperse up to $2 million checks with $5 million follow-ons, which is really going to advance any investee companies that you get on board with. So can you just enlighten us a little bit about some of the investments that you've had there since inception of this one?
Sure. Of AVV, you mean? Yeah. So our first close of AVV was late last year. We've just finished that fundraise effort. It's an IFC and Alibaba-backed fund, as well as funds of funds and family offices in Asia, Europe, and the US. So the fundraise effort, of course, especially during COVID, took up a fair amount of time, but we were very happy to start investing late last year. We now have 10 companies in our portfolio, primarily based in Vietnam, but targeting international opportunities. So international may be regional, they may be global. And so these are companies like Virtual Internships, which is founded by fellow Brits, actually, but based here in Vietnam, helping students and young professionals around the world get access to on-the-job learning opportunities, internships, virtually, hence the name, Virtual Internships. That was one of our investments out of our prior fund, actually, and has progressed along the way. Sequoia, Kaplan, other notable institutional investors have come in after us, and we're happy to continue to be part of that journey. So I mean, one of the theses we had when we started with our first fund and ongoing to our second was a belief that Vietnamese teams or teams based here could build not just for Vietnam, but for markets around the world. The talent is here, the perspectives are here, and we thought it was just a matter of time before the cases emerged. And so, our very first investment was a company called ELSA, using speech recognition and machine learning technology to help people learn English, that now has users in 100 countries worldwide. One of our investments around 2018, 2019 is a company called Axie Infinity, which many people have heard of by now, but it's, for those who haven't, it's a Web3 gaming company. Basically blew open this sector. And as an example, they were making about $100,000 a month at the beginning of 2021, and by August of 2021, they were making nearly $200 million per month of revenue. Team based right here in Vietnam, a homegrown founder, very exciting team. So after cases like ELSA and Axie Infinity, investors have started to come here and look around, what's going on? Some surprise. We were very happy to not be surprised. So yeah, we're hoping to find more companies like that, category makers, or at least companies that can transform existing industries.
And what I like about your approach is you actually work very intensely with the companies you invest in, mentor and counsel them. Some other VC competitors, they tend to do almost like a factory induction style approach, where they just have a massive VC cohorts come in, they all co-work together, and they try to pick, the winners from those and just see who survives. I think your model being more collaborative is a good way to see this type of sector progress. And the government legally in Vietnam is very much on the front foot supportive of this sector as well. For a few years now, actually, they've tried to formalize everything through Decree 38 for making investing into the VC arena a much more investable market for not only the locals, but also for foreign investors who are interested in this space, who can then come in through vehicles such as yours. In my experience, do you see any further progress for such as exit enhancement? Would you like to see, at the moment, the VC investors, they usually do an SPA, sell into the next round, don't they? Series A, B, C, and so on. Do you see any potential exits opportunities that could be more liquid in Vietnam, and any enhancements that you might, from your US experience, like to see come into Vietnam?
For sure. There are already exit paths for companies, and I'll actually come back to that. But first, I wanted to plus one your earlier comment on the efforts that government has been making to make it more friendly for entrepreneurs to get started and investors to get involved with those entrepreneurs. I think it was a major factor for me under consideration when I was setting things up. I remember it was the 2014, 2015 that the government was becoming more and more vocally supportive of entrepreneurs generally, but especially digital entrepreneurs. I remember that was when they were talking about turning Vietnam into a startup nation, and 2016 was declared to be the year of the startup. And for a long time, the government has been sponsoring the largest annual tech event here, Tech Fest. And even recently, just a couple days ago, the government sponsored the Vietnam Blockchain Summit. So these kinds of, the convening power that the government has in Vietnam is meaningful, and also kind of the green light to folks is meaningful. Of course, regulation continues to evolve, and as any government, there are kind of positive evolutions and then things to be explored still. But I think it's very clear that the efforts that the government has made around venture capital formation, and specifically, has supported the renewed interest of venture capitalists internationally, and the formation of local VC firms as well. So we've seen a big proliferation of colleagues in the venture space. So definitely appreciate that and understand that, it's not easy necessarily to get to this point. So I'm very appreciative. In terms of exits here, for smaller exits, M&A tends to be the primary path, and I think that will be so for the foreseeable future. Larger opportunities have historically considered overseas listings, and I know there are some of the biggest companies, multi-billion-dollar companies here, that have been gearing up for IPOs, for example, on NASDAQ. I think in the long run, it would be great to also have as a path a local listing opportunity on the local exchange. And it is there, but as we know, tech companies have different dynamics than traditional companies, particularly around profitability, the timing of that profitability, consistency of the profitability. So whereas some of the rules around listing here locally have been geared around conventional companies, they will have to evolve in order for digital companies to consistently consider listing locally as an option. I know, though, that There are a number of government officials that have been studying this, as well as stock exchange staff looking at how to make something happen here over the next 3 to 5 years. So I'm awaiting that.
Yeah, it might actually perhaps potentially kick off on a subsidiary board that's got less onerous listing restrictions, profitability restrictions, like perhaps the Upcom exchange, maybe.
Yeah, Singapore has done a similar strategy. I think it's a great initial start.
Yeah. Now, your thoughts on where VC firms are going to be focusing their investments and where they'll be deploying their capital over the next 3 to 5 years in Vietnam?
Southeast Asia has been a growth market across the board for the last 10 years. On the tech side, Singapore and Malaysia really kicked things off for the region. And then Indonesia, especially for the last 5 years, has been a very exciting market. But at this point, I and a lot of my VC colleagues have seen Indonesia to be mature, saturated. In fact, perhaps the valuations have been too high for some years now. And so starting from about a couple of years ago, Vietnam has become the next place to look. There's venture capital opportunity across the board, across stages. And each VC investor is seeing their own flair. But I think generally speaking, there's a lot still in e-commerce and logistics, fintech, education tech, future of work, even healthcare tech and agri-tech, which are traditionally harder areas to look at. A lot of people are planning on making bets here, have already made bets here. So we particularly are looking at the more capital efficient aspects of these sectors. So some of our biggest wins have been around education tech, future of work, and fintech. And so we'll continue to double down on that.
Now, the outlook for the investee companies that you've got at this point in time, you mentioned Axie Infinity. I have to just ask, what's the vision of this one? Is it going to list somewhere? If so, where? And potentially when? Everyone knows it.
Sure, yeah. So, the Sky Mavis team, that's the holding company of Axie Infinity, and we were looking at this as a long-term play, something that would transform the world over a 10-year horizon, not a 2-year horizon. And the fact that they were able to achieve the breakout success that they saw last year was a very pleasant surprise. Gave them a lot of capital for their war chests, gave them a lot of attention and some of the problems that come with that as well. But they are battle tested and they are continuing to keep the long view. They now have something like $100 million in the bank, 10 years of runway to continue to build towards that 10-year vision. And so what is that? That is a place that has transformed, restructured the gaming sector, and possibly introduced blockchain and other use cases as well. So they continue on that path. They are producing, putting out new product every day, not literally, but very rapidly. And they don't talk about IPO because it's a near-term thing. They're looking to build. They have a multi-billion-dollar business right now. They're looking to build a tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions, of business over the next several years. So, and they have a great group of team members and investors behind them to help see that through.
How big approximately is the employee base there now?
So it is now about 150 people.
And when you invested?
10 people.
Wow. Okay.
It was very fun, actually. We spoke with them. They hadn't even really released a product yet, but they had built a community and a concept that we felt was very indicative of what could come. A community that was not just shilling token price that like a lot of other blockchain products have been doing over the last 18 months, but that really were believers of the mission, so much so that they were writing songs about Axie Infinity and getting Axie Infinity tattoos and so on. Real believers. And so that's very rare to find in any space, let alone one that is as nascent as blockchain. So we went in and had a chance to work with them, not just work with them, but actually literally work alongside them. They were in our office for quite a while. We were able to provide them a variety of guidance, and after a few years, they pushed through, and here they are now. But still a lean team of 150 people.
Eddie, is that the largest employee generation investment story that you've had to date? Because that's 15x, which is fantastic. So if you could replicate that half a dozen times, not only your investors but also the people of Vietnam seeking employment opportunities through having you as an investor, I'm sure they'd be very much welcoming you knocking on their door.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, we are aiming to build. On one hand, we are aiming to help founders build capital-efficient businesses, and so they should not have to hire 100,000 people. But of course, to target large markets, they should have to hire hundreds or thousands of people, like a Facebook, like a Google. We're happy so far that our companies have created 5,000 jobs in Vietnam and other markets around the world so far, and we expect that number to increase. More importantly is the quality of the jobs, and then even more importantly than that is the actual impact of the products and services that are being provided. So as an example, Axie Infinity in the Philippines helped engage a lot of people in financial services for the first time. People who didn't have bank accounts were setting up digital wallets. It's a pretty exciting trend there. Or we have another company that helps students around the world study abroad, get a liberal arts education, say in North America or the UK. They have worked with something like 100,000 students around the world. So I think those kinds of impact metrics are the ones that most excite us.
Yeah. Wonderful. Eddie Tai, General Partner of Ascend Vietnam Ventures, or AVV. Thank you so much for joining Mirae Asset Securities, Mirae Asset Live, to update us on the success to date of your new venture fund. And always a pleasure to have you back to speak and update us on your further investments as they progress in the coming time.
Looking forward to being back here. Thanks again.
Thank you. Steve Brown from Mirae Asset Securities. Have a good morning.